and welcome to Counterpunch Radio. My name is Eric Draitzer. Thanks so much for tuning in, coming back to the show. First time listeners finding the show, welcome aboard. Always happy to have you. Hope you've had a chance to check out Counterpunch Plus, the brand new subscriber section over at the website there. Although the print publication has gone to a better place, it's been retired, it is no more. You can now become a subscriber directly through the website. Not only will you get all of the columns, all of the things that used to be in the print magazine, you'll also now have access to more than 25 years of archives, all of the great stuff that was printed in Counterpunch going back to the 1990s, the 2000s, the last decade, all the way up till today. So much great stuff. Not a lot of places you're going to go to find a feature like that. It's also a great way to support Counterpunch, to keep this alternative media publication going. Go to the website, get your subscription today. You can also buy the merchandise, get a Counterpunch Radio t-shirt, do what you got to do to help us out. That's greatly appreciated. So if I could turn to my guest today, very happy to speak with him. It's been a couple of years since he was on the program, so a lot to cover with Ramzy Baroud. Ramzy is a US-Palestinian journalist. He's a media consultant, an author, an editor at Palestine Chronicle, a senior research fellow at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, and he is, perhaps most importantly, the author of the recent and excellent book, These Chains Will Be Broken: Palestinian Stories of Struggle and Defiance in Israeli Prisons. That was from 2020. Ramzy Baroud, welcome back to Counterpunch Radio.
Thank you for having me, Eric, and thank you for all the fantastic work that you and Counterpunch continue to do after all these years.
Thank you so much for that and for all of your great work. We're going to talk a bit about the book a little bit later, but I want to talk a little politics with you right now at the outset. Of course, we're speaking here. It's the very beginning of December of 2020. We are in a transitional phase. Trump is on his way out. Biden is on his way in. And before we can talk about Biden, let's talk a little bit about the Israeli government and what exactly they're thinking and doing in these last days of the Trump administration. So help us understand, what are they doing? What are they thinking? What might they do?
Well, Netanyahu put it himself best when he said that Israel has never had it better than under the presidency of Donald Trump. And this is not to suggest that previous presidents were less supportive of Israel or less biased or less you know uh, you know in terms of financing and in terms of supporting their military and all of this. But in actuality, Trump was quite different in a sense. He is the first American president who completely marginalizes any concern for any sort of an American foreign policy agenda, even if quite a humble one, and put the entire American foreign policy apparatus in the Middle East in the service of Israel. Basically, American foreign policy became more like a wish list for President or Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Whatever Israel wanted, it's exactly what Israel got, regardless of whether it violates international law or not. And of course, regardless of it violates America's own foreign policy interests in the Middle East or not. So we saw so much that's happening under the Trump administration in terms of moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the this complete dismissal of Palestinian refugees' right of return, the recognition of the Golan Heights to be part and parcel of Israel. That's the annexation of the Golan Heights that took place in the early 1980s, and of course the annexation of nearly third of the West Bank. Although it hasn't really happened with the kind of media fanfare that many people have expected, in reality, it's the de facto annexation is underway as we speak. Now, of course, America will most likely find a way to return to some kind of a status quo that existed prior to Trump. The problem is it's kind of too little too late for that to take place, because Biden has made it very clear that he, under no circumstance, will be reversing any of the decisions that were made by his predecessor as far as Israel is concerned. So we are not going to be seeing an American embassy moving back to Tel Aviv. We are not seeing, any of these settlements that have been built and during the Trump administrations to the settlement construction to even slow down. Everything is going to carry on as usual. What we are going to see, however, is kind of a return to the old style political platitudes, peace process, you know, stability, negotiations, all the kind of the terminologies, these kind of very deceptive terminologies that kind of may indicate that something is actually happening when in reality nothing is happening whatsoever, except that Israel is continued to do as it pleases in the occupied Palestinian territories. I think the best statement that we have heard about this comes from Miki Zohar, one very influential member of the Israeli Likud party, the main party in Israel at the moment, and it's the party of Netanyahu himself, when he said that these days are an irreplaceable opportunity to establish our hold on the land of Israel. And he said that I am sure that our friend Donald Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu will be able to take advantage. Really, this has been the name of the game, the taken advantage part. And indeed, they have been taken advantage in every way imaginable. They are expanding the settlements, especially in the East Jerusalem area, to ensure that there is a total discontinuity, geographic discontinuity, and territorial discontinuity between the West Bank and Jerusalem, in addition to other measures, basically, to prejudice any possibility of a just and sustainable solution in Palestine. So, and we are going to be seeing a lot more of that until Biden is in power. And by the way, things are not going to dramatically change even when Biden is in power, but there might be a little bit of kind of pull and push there, a little bit of tugging, a little bit of conflict. They are saying that they are going to try to keep the conflict hidden, unlike what happened during the Obama administration when conflict kind of went up the surface and all of that. But they want to keep things under wraps so that it doesn't appear at any moment that there is any sort of disagreement between Netanyahu's right wing government and the new American administration.
I want to get to the question of Biden, what to expect from the Biden administration, and so forth in a few minutes. But before we leave Trump, I want to ask you your analysis of Trump, the Trump administration, not Trump the individual so much, but the Trump administration and its allegiance and close lockstep policy with Israel. What do you attribute that to, as opposed to, say, other Republican administrations that had come before that were also very much pro-Israeli? What is the difference here? Is it Jared Kushner and a personal connection? Is it Sheldon Adelson and some of the wealthy financiers that have been bankrolling Trump? Is it a combination of those and other factors? How do you explain this deep commitment?
Right, and which is particularly interesting in the sense that we did not know Trump to be a Zionist ideologue prior to this. We know that he's a business tycoon. He's an opportunistic person who would, change his skin whenever needed in order for him to elevate his position, strengthen his position, and benefit in any possible way, whether in terms of business or politics. And he said it. I mean, there was a particularly interesting statement he made at an APAC conference prior to becoming a president, where he said that we should try to be at an equal distance, more or less. That's what he said, an equal distance between Palestinians and Israelis, and not take sides. And there was a lot of fear that Trump, in fact, some people even within the pro-Palestine groups kind of argued that Trump, as insane as he sounded, at least in terms of language and discourse, he might actually be better for the Palestinians in the sense that he is not relying on the APAC's money, the Israeli lobby's money, because that's what most politicians have been after, financial support and backing in their political campaigns, whether at a state level or at the federal level. And, Trump is rich. He doesn't need this anymore. But what happened was actually quite the opposite. And I think there are two main reasons for that. From an opportunistic business point of view, Trump realized that he actually doesn't need the Palestinians. The Palestinians are not, they carry no economic value. They have no strategic or geopolitical value. And therefore, they shouldn't even be in the equation altogether. So, in a way, he kind of took us back in the day, in the 50s, 60s, even 70s and early 80s, when the Palestinians were, as a Palestinian leadership, were removed entirely from any political transaction that was taking place in the Middle East, and someone else spoke on their behalf. whether well intentioned or not. So at times, Jordan claimed to speak on behalf of Palestinians, King Hussein, Jamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, even Gaddafi of Libya. And Palestinians were kind of like second, third class citizens within that political equations, constantly trying to kind of find someone to speak on their behalf, but they did not represent themselves until 1991 or the early 90s, when the Palestinian leadership took kind of a direct role in shaping the Palestinian political narrative in the Madrid talks, involving Dr. Haidar Abdel Shafi and the late Saib Barikat and Faisal Husseini and others. There was kind of really the time where finally there was a Palestinian leadership that was recognized internationally, speaking on behalf of the Palestinians. And Trump and his administration, but particularly the Kushner led committee, because it was really Kushner and his personal friendships with Mohammed ibn Zayed in the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed ibn Salman in Saudi Arabia, Ambassador Friedman, of course, played a major role in this, and they tried to kind of create this kind of situation where they kind of leaped over Palestinians altogether. Palestinians, just for them, as far as they were concerned, there was the famous statement that was attributed to Mohammed ibn Salman during a meeting with an Israeli pro-Israel lobby group in Washington D.C. when he said Palestinians need to either put up or shut up, and that was also repeated by Kushner in a different way later on. So Palestinians can either play the game and get a little bit of money on the side, or they just do not belong in this political calculation whatsoever. So that's what happened. Palestinians were removed entirely from that agenda. And when the Palestinians were removed entirely, there was absolutely no obstacle whatsoever in the face of Israel to do whatever it pleases, because now it's not accountable to anything. I mean, I know some people would say, well, when was Israel ever accountable to anything? But at least there was some kind of a protocol. At least there was some sort of a discussion and a conversation over what violates Oslo and what doesn't violate Oslo. There was some references to international law. There was some references to the two-state solution. All of this was eradicated. All of this was erased entirely. And the discussion became about normalization, economic integration of Israel into the larger Middle East, and the Palestinians were entirely selected and deleted from the Middle East file of Donald Trump. That was really led by Jared Kushner and the brainchild of Jared Kushner himself.
When you consider the legacy of Donald Trump and the Trump administration vis-a-vis Palestine, there's so many horrendous chapters that you could think of. Of course, the U.S. embassy going to Jerusalem is an obvious one. Land grabbing, the expansion of settlements, looking the other way, all of these things. But one that I think really strikes me and maybe could potentially be one of the real linchpins of the Trump legacy vis-a-vis Palestine is the designation of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement as anti-Semitic, which was recently done by Secretary of State Pompeo in a visit to one of the settlements. Now, I want to speak to you a little bit about whether or not you think that well, A, whether or not you think that that was important, significant, and anything more than a symbolic gesture. And then B, do you think that it could potentially have a lasting legacy given that Biden and the incoming Biden administration is likely to uphold that same view?
Right, right. I think in a way, Trump has done a favor to American politicians and American foreign policy and the Congress as well. I mean, it's important that we note that almost none of the policies regarding Palestine that were enacted by Donald Trump um, came out of nowhere. Nothing was just really just he grabbed it from the air and created new policies and new legacies that did not exist. Almost every single decision he made in favor of Israel had some roots in American foreign policy or in American law. For example, the Jerusalem Embassy Act, in which he enacted. I mean, the Embassy Act was passed in the mid 1990s. Both sides of the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, voted in near majority. I mean, in full majority, of course, but there were very few people who dared reject the claim that Jerusalem should be the eternal capital of Israel, regardless of international law. What happened since then is that there is this, interesting tradition that every American president decided to postpone that enactment that passed by the U.S. Congress. I think it was '94, if I remember correctly, And every 6 months they would sign off and a waiver would say, let's wait for another 6 months, let's wait for another 6 months, and so forth and so on. And Trump came and he said, well, if Palestinians really don't matter to anybody, and I'm not really interested in the peace process, which itself is a scam, really, a foreign policy scam aimed at ensuring American leadership in the region. And I think this is something that we really do need to take talk about, in the sense that it's not like, oh, Biden dismissed any prospect for peace. He didn't. There was no prospects for peace under the American leadership in the Middle East. What was happening in the Middle East is an American attempt at imposing itself in two different ways. Of course, there was the military means, the invasion of Iraq, and involvement in other military conflicts, and of course the political means. The political means was the peace process. That was the American American method of determining friends and enemies in the Middle East. If you agree with the peace process, you are a moderate Arab, moderate Middle Eastern regime. If you disagree, you are extremist, you are terrorist, you are a terrorist sympathizer. So it was useful in that sense, not because really the Americans, after all of these years, they were still insisting that yes, a just peace is still possible. We know it was really nonsensical to begin with, even during the heyday of the peace process. What Trump has decided, since for him, traditional American foreign policy did not matter anymore, it kind of follows rationally that the peace process didn't add up. It was unimportant. Normalization, economic integration was important. Getting Saudi and Emirati and Qatari billions was far more important. So why should I bother? So he went basically and went back and accepted all of these things that have already existed in American political agenda, moving the embassy, finally declaring that the settlements are legal, and the Golan Heights and all of these things. But every single one of these issues actually existed and had basis in American foreign policy. They wanted to do these things, but they did not have, maybe they did not feel like it was the opportune time politically to move forward with these issues. Every single administration, including the Bill Clinton administration, including the Obama administration. And now Trump changed the rules of the game entirely, and therefore there was no need for any of these points or these items on the agenda in the first place.
I think we'd be remiss in talking about Israel in the waning days of the Trump administration if we didn't also talk about the very recent assassination of a top Iranian nuclear scientist, or rather the head of the nuclear program, and what many around the world are speculating about, who carried that out, what that means, why that was done, the timing, etc. So I'd just like to get your comment on everything that you said. Of course, I agree with respect to the Trump administration and their policies on Israel and the Palestinians. But give me your analysis of the Trump posture towards Iran. I mean, there's a number of ways to read it, and it's not exclusively that the Trump administration was doing Israel's bidding, although that's certainly part of it. I'd like to get your analysis of the U.S. posture as it relates to Iran, and whether or not the change to a Biden administration is really going to affect that issue and also potentially the Palestinians.
Right. So Iran is one of these unifying subjects now in the minds not just of Israel but few Arab countries. They refer to them in the media as Sunni Arabs. It's just really not true at all, because Algeria, Mauritania, Tunisia, they are Sunni Arabs. They are not really involved in this. Even Qatar is a Sunni Arab, and they are not involved in this. But these are very specific agendas of certain Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, and that for strategic reasons and for economic reasons, and of course Bahrain, and that's for fear that the majority of Shias who live in Bahrain will eventually kind of overthrow the Ibn Khalifa's regime, and change the entire political setup of that country. This is why there is so much enthusiasm in Bahrain to link up to Israel so that they could feel protected if the two hegemons, the Saudis and the Israelis, are kind of sheltering the Khalifa family and the royals of that country, then they are more or less safe from Iran. And I think Trump knew this very well, because for years during the Obama administration, there was this much discussion in Middle Eastern media, especially in Arabic media, that Obama has betrayed the Arabs. Obama has betrayed the Saudis. What is going on here? Why is he signing nuclear pacts with Iran? Why is he normalizing Iran's strength and hegemony in the region? And why is this giving of back of hundreds of billions of dollars of Iranian money, Iranian assets that were held illegally by the US and by other Western powers, is going to be given back? And they are going to use this not just to advance Iranian's economy, but to also advance Iran's strategic interests in Bahrain, in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, and even in Gaza. Trump knew very well that this is something that Israel, the Saudis, the Emiratis agree on. And in order for him to win favor and to prove that he is unlike that betrayer, Obama, he is going to immediately take action. And he did. Number one, he took his country, withdrew from the Iran nuclear agreement. That was a very, very important step for Israel. And I don't think under any circumstance Israel would have agreed to work with Trump if he did not take that step. That step, of course, earned the U.S. Nearly $200 billion immediately from the Saudis and the Emirati, an amount that kept growing with time. So he felt like it really was worth that kind of effort. However, he didn't want to go to war against Iran. It was very clear that Trump wasn't really in the appetite for war, and he knew that what happened in Iraq was a disaster. Iraq is a much smaller country than Iran. Iran is much more powerful, geographically larger, more resourceful, and has much greater influence in the region. And he did not want to take that gamble, so he did the next best thing, which is more and more sanctions on Iran, total isolation of Iran in every possible way. And when that was not enough, especially in kind of the final period in Trump's rule, he began kind of taking the kind of violent steps that were calculated, knowing that the Iranian response will not tantamount to an all-out war. It started with the killing of Soleimani, and then eventually with the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh a few days ago, knowing that this is something that Israel really, really wanted, and he wanted to kind of maintain that, hammer that message home, that I stood by you until the very, very end, and this is the best I can give you under these circumstances. And sadly, I think there will be more. I mean, we've been talking about the fact that we should be expecting something from the Americans. They went after Fakhrizadeh. I don't think this is the end of it. I think more will happen, whether directly through the US or through an American, Saudi, Israeli, some kind of a plot by the three of them, or at least allow the Israelis, give them a free hand to do whatever they needed to do in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Iran. And I think we will be seeing more of this in coming days and weeks.
Much more to talk about. Let's take a quick break. On the other side of the break, we'll continue the conversation. I want to talk a little bit about demographic imperatives for the Israeli state and what that means for Israel and the Palestinians. I want to talk, of course, about Biden, the incoming administration, and a whole lot more with Ramzy Baroud. You're listening to Counterpunch Radio. Enjoy the music. We'll be right back.
Alle mann vi antirasister, ikke anklag oss for å være antisemitter, Tumi, el tipo este, tonto noisa, gatas parlament. Hay que hacer no solamente hablar, boycott Israel.
Ben Bada told us knowledge was the fifth element. Truth behind the lies is what the music represents. So how the fuck you gonna have a peace settlement when people want a piece of your land to build settlements? There's all different kind of terrorism you could perpetrate. Every dead body causes karma to circulate. It's suicide bombing buildings full of civilians, or cutting off water to cities full of children. You can't try to justify collective punishment. A country never finds peace with bodies buried under it. I guess some Americans just don't remember there's a slave graveyard under the World Trade Center. Stop the criticism of Iranian nuclear fission until mutual nuclear disarmament's the mission. This ain't about religion, Muslim, Jew or Christian. It's about people making money off of that division.
Sin que medien armamentos, digo siempre es buen momento para iniciar. Entendimiento es demasiado el desencuentro, siento. Que el respeto debe ser boleto al parlamento. Es el respeto el primer paso, si no lo que sigue es cuento. Es un complejo asunto, cuánto tiempo, son cientos de años. El premio al mayor daño para los de menor tamaño. Me empeño en no estar de acuerdo con ninguna posición que implique a lo más cual versión de discriminación, brother. Violencia, intolerancia en cualquier forma de expresión, más allá de cualquier religión, visión de obsesión. Hay que hacer, no solamente hablar. Boycott Israel.
I am recognizing that the voices in my head are urging me to be myself and never follow when I'm led. So with that said, it's insurgency as we confirm some things. I am anti-Zionist and any fundamentalist. The devil's in the specifics, mixing with your favorite dish. You can beef with Israel and I'll be anti-Semitic. Don't buy beef from Israel cause you paying to kill them kids. So if you're rocking this shit, go ahead do the Gaza Strip. My heart race when I hear apartheid from off their lips. We have lived in Mr. Olympic scene, free Mandela pickets in this image being repeatedly to street favela children even freed from prison cause of global criticism of this horrible system boycotted by the citizens.
No let me some beat the head. Boycott Israel. Hay que hacer, no solamente hablar. Boycott Israel.
And we're back chatting with Ramzy Baroud again. The new book, These Chains Will Be Broken, Palestinian Stories of Struggle and Defiance in Israeli Prisons. That's from Clarity Press 2020. Excellent book. Get yourself a copy. It's the holidays, a perfect time to get a book of that emotional gravity. Really, really important stories for people to know. So, Ramzy, I want to pick up where we left off and talk a little bit about demographics, because this is, of course, such a critical issue when it comes to Israeli policy towards the Palestinians and towards the occupied territories. So, can you talk a little bit about the demographic crisis that Israel is facing, how they are using, I guess, what you might call somewhat legal and somewhat extra legal means to address their demographic crisis, and just introduce our listeners to that issue?
So I think it's a very important issue, and I don't think it receives the kind of the discussion that it deserves. And the reason behind that is we kind of often think of political issues or of conflict in terms of politics and military, but then you have the cultural aspect, and Israeli historians and journalists have been kind of talking more. Once in a while you kind of see this article, surfacing on Haaretz or somewhere else in which there's a warning, not a warning of the demographics itself, but that Israel as a culture will be swept away by Palestine as a culture. And I think that what most likely is going to be the culmination of this so-called conflict anyway, simply because Palestinian culture is rooted and it's part of a larger mosaic of Arab Middle Eastern cultures that have been going on for such a long time, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, compared to an Israeli culture that really was kind of invented, kind of a big mishmash of Eastern European, cultures and coming from all over the world. And because there was no particular identity to the Israeli culture, there was this kind of the process of stealing land was also accompanied with the process of stealing culture. So you hear these kind of interesting notions about Israeli hummus and Israeli couscous and Israeli this and that is essentially Palestinian and essentially Arab and essentially Middle Eastern and has nothing to do with Israel whatsoever, simply because we haven't yet seen a brand of an Israeli culture. Despite the fact that Israel has been around for 70 years, there is nothing that's so unique that distinguishes Israel in complete separation from the region around it. Now, if you put this within, so that you have that cultural issue, if you put it within the context of the demographics, of the fact that the number of Palestinians continue to grow despite of all attempts at isolating them and confining them to various zones, like in the West Bank. We speak about zone A, B, and C, and that's a whole different story. But even within these zones A, B, and C, you have people who are divided by checkpoints and by apartheid walls and by fences and by trenches and that sort of thing. And of course, you have the Palestinians who are living in isolation within isolation in East Jerusalem, who are isolated. They are not incorporated into Israel as a polity and as a political and social landscape, and they are not allowed to connect with their Palestinian brethren in Beit Lahem, in Beit Jala, and in the surrounding areas in the West Bank. But within the East Jerusalem itself, Palestinian communities are cut off from each other, living in isolated villages and refugee camps and so forth and so on. And this is basically the paradigm applied anywhere else, whether to Palestinians living inside Israel. Those are the Palestinians who were not ethnically cleansed in 1948. Palestinians, of course, who are living under complete and utter isolation in the Gaza Strip and so forth. Yet, despite of all of this, the Israelis keep calculating the numbers, and the demographics are not adding up. For them, Palestinians as a people, as a nation, not as Mahmoud Abbas, not as a Palestinian leadership, not as a Palestinian authority, they could care less about this. But as a people, that is the real threat. This is why they refer to it as the demographic bomb. This demographic bomb, they have been obsessing with numbers from the very beginning in 1948, when they tried to add up, the way, even the way that ethnic cleansing took place in 1948, it was done in a very calculated way, ethnically cleansing people who are living in the population centers and who had the potential of growing in numbers and outgrowing the number of Israeli Jews who moved to Palestine later on, and so forth and so on. Now, an interesting thing, just this October alone, there was an estimation that was done by the housing ministry. Now, the housing ministries all over the world are really there about housing people at an equal footing. I mean, more or less. I mean, I know it's not an ideal situation, even here in the United States, but the housing ministry in Israel is obsessed with demographics. They try to find regions in which they fear that Palestinian Arabs are going to grow in their numbers, and they are going to basically marginalize and reduce the number of Israeli Jews. So they play this game in advance. The housing ministry said in 2050, there was an internal report that was published by Haaretz on October 29th that said in 2050, the Palestinians of a town called Harish in northern Israel the Palestinian Arabs are going to be to grow in their number to outnumber the Israeli Jews. So as a result, they have decided to do the following. They have decided to expand the town of Harish to include Jews only and to exclude Arabs, and therefore they will maintain the majority of Jews in the town of Harish, past 2050. And during this time, of course, they are going to take every measure you can think of in order for them to reduce the number of Palestinians in that area. Now, this example is just a kind of a microcosm of something that's happening at a mass scale throughout Israel, and the Nakab in particular, the Palestinian Bedouins of the Nakab area, or Nakab as they call it, are living really kind of the most extreme example of that kind of demographic social experiment. They are constantly hauling them into reservations, into concentration camps, into areas in which the numbers they are not, so that they are not allowed natural demographic growth. That's the idea. If you isolate them, if you discourage them from building, if you destroy their villages, like the village of Araqib, for example, it was destroyed hundreds of times. And the Israelis are using it also symbolically. The Palestinians keep rebuilding Araqib, and the Israelis keep destroying Araqib. And they are using it as an example that under no circumstance will you be allowed to build a community and to thrive and to set roots and to challenge the demographic nature of Israeli planning, not just in the Nakab, but everywhere else in Palestine. And by the way, Eric, I think much of what's the discussion about Area C, which is about 60% of the West Bank, and we know that most of the annexation will be taking place in Area C. Area C, in particular, is designated for annexation because it is geographically important for Israel. That's where the most arable land, that's where the most Palestinian resources, in terms of water, in terms of land, in terms of other things, are located in Area C, but that is the least populated of Palestinian areas in the West Bank. They want the land, they don't want the people, and they keep pushing the people behind walls, fences, and really more or less reservations and townships, and creating this ensuring complete disconnect at a geographic level between these various communities, so they do not grow in any natural way.
And can you speak a little bit about the way in which the Israeli state is using its legal frameworks in order to achieve this demographic superiority? I'm thinking specifically of the recent nationality law and the various legal maneuvers that are being used to strip Arab Israelis of citizenship and other things like that. So, can you speak a little bit about some of these maneuvers that the state is making?
Of course, and these maneuvers, by the way, started in a long, long time ago. Following the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, nearly 800,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed in 1947-48, creating space for the state of Israel to exist upon the ruins of nearly 500 Palestinian village, town, and localities throughout Palestine, throughout historic Palestine. And there was that immediate process of renaming everything, erasing the Palestinian village and its heritage and giving it a Hebrew name. And usually these names, strangely enough, are derivatives of the Arabic name. So you kind of need to hear, like Ashdod is the town of Isdod, for example. But they tried their very best to kind of erase the identity of the Palestinians who were forced out of their homes and villages and forced to flee in 48, and that carried on for a long time. But I think there was a period in which Israel felt maybe at peace that demographically things are moving in the right direction. On one hand, they are maintaining majority, and when you have majority in the Knesset, you have majority in the Israeli parliament, you can pass all sorts of discriminatory laws against Palestinians to ensure, the socio-cultural discontinuity of these communities, ensure their demise, their imprisonment, and so forth and so on. But what ended up happening over time, and that's really when we began seeing the rise of the right wing constituency in Israel, the left in Israel, if really there was ever a left in Israel, is now below margin of error. There is a possibility that if elections, a fourth election in Israel within a year and a half, 2 years, takes place in March, the Labour Party, which is really the founding party of Israel, might not even register a single seat in the Israeli Knesset. So this rise of the right and the ultra right and the ultra nationalists and the really the neo fascists of Israel was accompanied by a lot of fear that we need to start taking some serious moves here in order for us to ensure that we have continued demographic superiority. I remember when Avigdor Lieberman, who later became the Minister of Defense in Israel, even when he made his kind of a case for himself politically, when he was kind of hardly known during those years, he came up, he kind of championed the idea of the transfer. Let's transfer, meaning ethnically cleanse hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from today's Israel, and let's just dump them in the West Bank, and the Palestinians can deal with it because of that demographic issue. And eventually, he talked about the land swap. Let's give the Palestinian populations who are living in the populated centers in the Galilee, in al Fahim, and other Palestinian Arabic towns in Israel, let's bring them into the under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority, and in exchange, we are going to take over the settlements and all of this. And this is really, these are the roots, Eric, of the annexation. I mean, what they are actually doing, is Avigdor Lieberman's idea of transfer and swap is actually happening without anything being swapped, without the Palestinians have to give anything back, everything, or getting anything back. And so everything that Israel has been doing since then and until today is related with the issue and the obsession of demographics. And of course, this is all happening within a legal framework. Like, for example, the nation state law. We know that Israel has existed as a Jewish state, but we also know that Israel doesn't have a constitution and doesn't have defined boundaries. And that was not done randomly. This was done on purpose. The purpose here being that there was always space for Israel to redefine itself in any way and redefine itself geographically as well in any way that it finds fit. So the basic law, it's ruled through a series of what they call basic laws. And the basic law of the nation state bill basically undermined the Arabic language, undermined Arabic culture, completely removed any sort of historical connection between Palestinians and Palestine, and gave the right of self determination not just to Israeli Jews, but to Jews anywhere in the world, and therefore kind of confirming this trajectory of racism and apartheid that has been taking place for such a long time. Just one last thing I would like to say about the issue of apartheid. For many years we have been arguing that apartheid isn't, is fully manifesting itself in Palestine and Israel. And there's been a lot of arguments that, well, maybe Israel is moving in that direction, but we don't have a full-fledged apartheid as of yet. Well, I think the nation state bill kind of really ended that conversation altogether, kind of nipped it in the bud, in the sense that now by law Israel is a country for the Jews and the Jews only, and anybody else who doesn't fit that definition has absolutely no rights, no human rights, no basic rights under the Israeli basic rights and the Israeli law.
And perhaps there's no more tangible and viscerally shocking example of the kind of apartheid ideology and mentality that you're talking about than the demolitions and the mass evictions. And I know you've recently been writing on this issue, and I want to ask you if you could just explain it for our listeners, particularly, maybe those uninitiated on this issue, why Israel does this. What is the logic behind it? Is it for practical purposes? Does it have a practical reason? Is it psychological warfare? Is it a combination of those things? And then also, is this expanding? Is this picking up the pace? And if so, where's it headed?
So Israel knows that it has a limited window of opportunity, not just in the final days of the Trump administration, but also in the early months of the Biden administration. It will take the U.S. a long time to, if indeed there was even faint interest in developing an actual strategy regarding Palestine and Israel. It's going to take months for that to take place, and I'm not really optimistic under Tony Blinken. I mean, we know his legacy, we know his statements on the issue, and we know the new Secretary of State that was nominated by Biden, and we know of his very strong friendships and relationships with Israel, particularly the Israeli right wing camp. So if there is indeed any U.S. Foreign policy that would be articulated in a framework of a doctrine, an agenda, a plan of any kind, it will take months for that to actually manifest itself in any practical way. During this time, Israel, of course, is now keen on taking some very serious and critical steps to ensure that and knowing that none of these steps will be reversed, it's important for Israel to take these steps now in order for them to ensure that there can be no actual discussion about a Palestinian state anytime soon. So yes, of course, there is the psychological component, and we've been talking about the Nakba, the Nakba of 1948, the catastrophe of 1948, and as if it's an event that was isolated in time and space, but in actuality, it's not. The Nakba continues because the Nakba was based on the idea of murder and ethnic cleansing and colonization, and that continues in what Israeli professor and historian Ilan Pape refers to as the incremental genocide. So that incremental genocide is happening. The ethnic cleansing that is in the Nakab underway as we speak is incremental genocide, and it's happening. The latest decision to ethnically cleanse 80 families out of the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem, and more will follow in Silwan and elsewhere in East Jerusalem, is part of that incremental genocide, and it's a continued part of the Nakba, and it's happening regardless of the political circumstances outside. But I think the particular steps that the Netanyahu government has taken in the last few weeks, and I presume in next weeks and months, are strategic more than anything else. Like, for example, the massive building that is expected in the settlement, in the illegal Jewish settlement of Givat Hamatos in East Jerusalem. This is not random. This is very much strategic in the sense that once the development of Givat Hamatos is going to, once it's completed, then Bethlehem and Jerusalem are completely cut off. Another settlement is that of Ramat Shlomo, also located in East Jerusalem. More developments will be happening in Ramat Shlomo again. Not only the Americans transferred their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now there is no discussion about Jerusalem because even from a practical point of view, the conversation is moot. Because now with Givat Hamatos and Ramat Shlomo and thousands of new families moving in, what do you expect from us? Do you want us to ethnically cleanse our own people for the Palestinians to have their capital in East Jerusalem? So it kind of really kind of shuts off the argument regarding East Jerusalem being that designated capital for the Palestinian state. And I think in the next days and weeks we are going to be seeing more announcements of yet more illegal Jewish settlements, but again this time more of like kind of strategically positioned settlements with the aim of prejudicing any attempt by Biden and Washington to kind of return back to the old language about the peace process and the two-state solutions and so forth.
One of the obvious themes in talking about Israeli moves against the Palestinians is about land grabbing. It is quite literally the stealing of land, the stealing of resources, and it's very easy to get caught up in thinking only about land. But in fact, there's quite a lot going on off the coast in the territorial waters that actually belong to the Palestinians. And I'm thinking of major gas finds off the coast of Palestine, including untapped gas fields that are worth billions of dollars potentially to the Palestinians. Israel covets these resources as well. Israel has targeted them. Can you speak a little bit about Israeli moves in the Eastern Mediterranean and what that means for the potential for Palestinians to have some of that mineral resource wealth?
Absolutely. So there's been a geopolitical war that has been kind of brewing for quite some time, and there's been kind of even talks about this war kind of translating to something actually physical on the ground as in a material conflict, and especially between Turkey on one hand and Greece and Cyprus on the other. We know that a while back Israel, Greece, and Cyprus signed an agreement regarding the extension of the a gas pipeline from Israel, Leviathan field in particular, or the Leviathan basin, all the way to Europe, to Italy and other European entities that would go through the territorial waters of Cyprus and Greece. Egypt quickly joined in, and the result of this, it kind of really created this conflict that resulted to an outright conflict between Turkey and Greece. And sadly, the media have been discussing the Turkish-Greek conflict as if it's an extension of their 1974 war, with absolutely no context and no relations to the agreement that was signed by Netanyahu and the leaders of these countries just shortly before that. Because Turkey and Russia as well, they feel that this is an attempt by Europe to isolate them. On one hand, if Turkey is being cut off in such a way, they will not be able to reach the territorial waters of their allies, especially in Libya. And Turkey will no longer be used as a corridor for Russian gas that is being transferred to Europe. So Turkey sets to lose a massive amount of money, and Russia as well is gonna be suffering greatly financially as a result of this. For 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 Europeans, of course, this is quite interesting because as Palestinians, we have been demanding sanctions and calling on Europe and other entities to boycott Israel and to hold Israel accountable to its war crimes in Palestine through economic sanctions. But what we are actually seeing is the exact opposite. We are seeing further integration of Israel in the European political sphere, and that's really quite dangerous. It's dangerous because it's very empowering for Israel in Europe, but it's also empowering for Israel in the Middle East as well. Now Israel is selling gas after the massive finds that they found in the Leviathan basin. They are selling gas to Egypt and they are selling gas to Jordan as well. And believe it or not, the first customer of that Israeli gas that really should have never been Israeli gas in the first place was the Palestinian Authority. They were the first to buy their own gas from Israel in order for them to be able to generate electricity. And you would say, well, this is kind of ludicrous. Why would the Palestinians do this? Well, it's not the first time. The water in the West Bank right now is being sold by an Israeli company that steals the water from the Palestinian aquifers in the West Bank and turn around and sell it back to the Palestinians. So the Palestinians not only don't have access to their own gas, they also don't have access to their own water. And they are being really kind of largely excluded from the discussion over gas. I mean, this issue appears to be an exclusively an Israeli issue, and Israel is kind of setting the agenda, the political and economic agenda of the natural gas in that region, of course, at the expense of Russia, Turkey, the Turk Stream, and the Nord Stream, the two main sources of European gas that have been coming through Russia. Now, the other interesting thing is that there was a massive find in of gas in close to the Gaza coast that falls, even according to the unfair Oslo agreement, falls within the Palestinian territorial water. And that gas, not only Palestinians will never be recipients of financial aid from anybody, and not only Palestinians will have their own satisfy their own market need of gas and energy, but they will actually be able to export their own gas, and yet they are not allowed to do so. Israel has been planning to actually steal, of course, the Palestinian natural gas of the Gaza basin, of the coast of Gaza, and it has been sitting there for 20 years after the find that was made by British Petroleum. I remember at the time Yasser Arafat referred to this as a gift from God, he said, in the sense that finally we have liberated ourselves economically. But if, of course, Israel doesn't want a situation in which Palestinians are economically independent in any way. So they made it impossible for Palestinians to access their own gas, and they are actually planning and plotting to steal that gas as well. It's the sad, tragic situation, but that is also the nature of colonialism. I mean, you do not colonize the land and oppress the people and do not make use of the resources. That's really the very essence of colonialism. So this fight over natural gas that Israel is sadly winning is also part of the colonial struggle of Palestinians against Israel.
100% could not have said that better. Now, we have just a couple of minutes left, Ramsey, so I want to just talk a little bit, if we could, about your book. These Chains Will Be Broken, Palestinian Stories of Struggle and Defiance in Israeli Prisons. Talk to me a little bit about the genesis of this book. Where did the idea for this come from? What drove you to write this? And just the evolution of the project.
It's an extension of other projects that I began in 2003 with my first book, Searching Jenin, Eyewitness Accounts of the Israeli Invasion, which was kind of kind of looking back at it, as much as I felt strongly about the need to tell the story of what happened in the Jenin refugee camp in 2002, the Israeli massacre, and so forth. From a Palestinian point of view, I haven't really developed the needed tools that would allow me to present the Palestinian story or the Palestinian narrative in a way that would actually tell the story of Palestine through Palestinians and Palestinians only. So I wrote several books since then: The Second Palestinian Intifada, A Chronicle of a People's Struggle. Then there was my book, My Father Was a Freedom Fighter, Gaza's Untold Story, in which I tried to tell the story of Gaza through ordinary people. And this is really, I strongly believe what Antonio Gramsci has long argued, that everyone has a capacity of being an intellectual, even though they do not serve uh, that within designated spaces as intellectuals. And I wanted to tell the Palestinian story. I wanted to recenter the Palestinian story, and tell it through the point of view of the Palestinians themselves. is part of what we call reclaiming the narrative of Palestine. No, thank you. We don't want anyone to speak on our behalf. We need the solidarity of everyone, everywhere, but we are able to articulate our own story in our own way. And few books later that led me to the story of the prisoners, simply because I felt like this is the most profound of all Palestinian stories, yet it is the least told. um, Perhaps many people are afraid that you champion the cause of prisoners, people who already have kind of garnered that bad reputation of being people who used perhaps violence in their way of resisting the Israeli occupation. So, not a lot of people wanted to touch that issue. And sadly, in the media, we tend to talk about prisoners only when they are on a hunger strike and only when they are on an advanced form of hunger strike. Free this prisoner or that prisoner because they are going to die if they are not freed, and so forth and so on. But I wanted to recenter it. I wanted to retell the story of Palestine through those organic intellectuals, another Gramscian term, the organic intellectuals of Palestine. Tell me your story the way you see it. I am not an Israeli military judge. I am not questioning your motives. It's a judgment free zone here. Why have you done what you have you done? What did you experience? What are your roots? What's your history? Tell us about the way you feel in love with your wife, and tell us about your children, and tell us about your family, and tell us about your hopes and your dreams. And the outcome was something that really even astonished me myself. So in a way, we are changing the conversation on Palestine altogether, and it's just part of that effort. And I'm really quite happy to see that the book is going to be translated to Italian, Spanish, French, and other languages. And many of those prisoners who have their stories been told in the book, they are finally finding some breathing room where they can actually speak, in a non-dehumanized way to the media and to the rest of the world as Palestinian fighters and intellectuals whose stories deserves to be heard and listened to.
My final question to you, it's probably one I asked you the last time we spoke, but I think it's of a lot of value to people. Um, Ramsey, when you're speaking to people who are learning about these issues, who are living in the West, in the global North, in the United States, in Europe or Australia or elsewhere, um, oftentimes there is this lingering question. Maybe people are afraid to ask it or whatever, but I want to just ask you very simply, what do you tell people who say, what can I do to help the Palestinian cause?
Absolutely. I think one of the main issues, the main hindrances of the Palestinian cause finally achieving the coveted freedom and justice and peace for the Palestinian people is the misinformation that is constantly being spewed through the mainstream corporate media regarding Palestine and the Palestinians. This depiction of Palestinians as terrorists, and for Israel, presenting itself as an oasis of democracy and peace and civilization in the Middle East. So debunking, I think, really one of the main thing that can be done here, trying to understand history, politics from a Palestinian point of view, listening to the Palestinian people, and help us in the debunking of the Israeli propaganda. I think Israel is really not much of a state as much as of an illusion, an idea that Israel is a haven, and Israel was the most ideal answer to tragedies that happened in Europe and elsewhere. And of course, there's no truth to that. To the contrary, Israel was a continuation of these tragedies that happened in Europe. And if you really truly care about the human rights, if you truly care about justice and peace and all of this, you have to stand against apartheid in Israel, against Israeli racism, not for it. So understanding, really more important than anything else, understanding. And once you understand, you can lend your solidarity in a proper way, not as the center stage, not for you to marginalize Palestinians, but to listen to them, to understand things from their point of view, to appreciate their culture, to appreciate them as human beings. Not, okay, fine, we achieved not as terrorists, but also not as victims either, because we are neither. We are a thriving, strong nation that has fought and will continue to fight, and we take every opportunity at living a normal life under the harshest of circumstances. Now, once you achieve that, and once you are taking your part in the solidarity movement, and you are playing a part in having a better understanding of the situation in Palestine. Now, the sky is the limit. You can do so much with this. You can participate in the political conversations. You can hold your representatives accountable. You can hold the media accountable, and so forth and so on. So you can actually take that understanding and that solidarity and translate it to so many different things depending on the political context of your community. You can be part of our boycott movement. The very act of not buying an Israeli product is a political act, is in itself a political act. And by you making that decision, you become a political agent in solidarity with the Palestinian people. So much can be done, but it has to be based on true and organic understanding of the situation and the struggle of Palestine.
Ramzy Baroud, powerful voice for the Palestinian people. I highly recommend the book. These Chains Will Be Broken, Palestinian Stories of Struggle and Defiance in Israeli Prisons, giving voice to the Palestinian people to speak for themselves. So powerful, so important. Again, Ramzy Baroud, you can go find all of his work on the website, ramzybaroud.net. Go there. Of course, Palestine Chronicle, he is the editor. Ramzy Baroud, of course, always appears in Counterpunch whenever we can publish him. Thanks again, as always, Ramzy, for all of your work.
Thank you very much, Eric, and keep up the good work.
Listeners, thank you as always for listening and supporting Counterpunch, and we'll chat again next week.